The third race of the Michelin Endurance Cup takes us to beautiful upstate New York in the village of Watkins Glen. Watkins Glen has a long and storied history that has made it one of the most famous circuits in North America. Located in upstate New York in the Finger Lakes region, Watkins Glen began its racing history in 1948, when Cameron Argetsinger planned the first Watkins Glen Grand Prix to be held on a 6.6 mile or 10.6 kilometer course. 15 cars took place in that inaugural race, and that course would actually go on to be used for 5 years. 1953 marked a big change for the course as it was shortened to just 4.6 miles or 7.4 kilometers, and it was not run through the village of Watkins Glen anymore due to an accident the year before that claimed the life of a young child. This ultimately would spell the beginning of the end for the race being run on public roads, as there were further concerns that were raised due to lack of runoff and just lack of visibility throughout the entire course. And I will say, if you do find yourself in town for the race, or otherwise, I highly recommend checking out the old course. There are signs to guide you around the old course, and it's pretty incredible to take a drive through and to just see the conditions that these old races were run under. With the race no longer taking place on public roads, it was time to construct a permanent facility that the race could take place at. And the circuit that we actually have today is based on surrounding area roads. The course that we have today, though, is not entirely the original circuit, as in 1971 the boot portion of the track was added. Later on, the bus stop portion of the track was added to give us the current configuration that we have today, which is 11 turns, 3.4 miles or 5.47 kilometers, and it features 115 feet of elevation change. Now, one of the headlining events for this track is, of course, the 6 Hours of the Glen. Having taken place since 1968, except for a couple of years that were missed in 1981 to 1983, as well as 2020 for the COVID year, the track has hosted this great race. It's also hosted a number of other high-profile races, including the Formula One United States Grand Prix, and it continues to host various other forms of racing, including NASCAR, the SRO, as well as historic racing. This year's edition of the Sailin' 6 Hours of the Glen will feature 57 entries. Yes, 57. That is 9 more entries than were on the grid in 2022. 9 of them will be in the GTP class. That's an increase of 2 from the DPI class last year. LMP2 will also feature 9. That is also an increase of 2. LMP3 will feature 10 entries. That's a loss of 1. GTD Pro will feature 9 entries. They gain 2 from last year. And GTD will feature a strong 20 car grid. That is an increase of 4 entries from last year. Overall, the 57 entries marks the largest ever grid for this race. 162 laps were turned by the victorious Wayne Taylor Racing Acura of Ricky Taylor and Felipe Albuquerque in 2022. Meanwhile, in LMP2 was the number 52 PR1 Matheson Motorsports entry of Ben Keating, Mikael Jensen, and Scott Huffaker, who took class honors there. In LMP3, it was the number 74, the iconic blue and orange entry driven by Gar Robinson, Kayven Burlow, and Felipe Fraga. They are actually going for their third 6 Hours of the Glen win in a row this year. On the GTD Pro side, it was the number 23 Heart of Racing Aston Martin that was driven by Ross Gunn and Alex Riberas. And finally, in GTD, it was the sister Heart of Racing car, the number 27, that was driven by Romain DeAngelis, Maxime Martin, and Ian James. Now, unfortunately, you might recall last year there were some red flags towards the end of the race that really threw a wrench into the drive time calculations for some teams and ultimately led to many teams being demoted to the bottom of their class standings due to failing drive time minimums. Fingers crossed that we don't see that affecting the finishing results this year. Well, there's a number of things that you should be keeping an eye out for during this year's race. For one, Watkins Glen is a pretty well-rounded track that features some high speed, medium speed, and low speed corners, with lap times for the different classes ranging from around the 1 minute and 30 second mark for the GTP cars all the way up to about the 1 minute and 46 second mark for the GTD class. There are some great passing opportunities around this track, including into turn 1, as well as into the inner loop, or otherwise known as the bus stop, as well as into turn 8 or the heel of the boot. And while all these passing opportunities might be great, it's going to be really important for drivers to also exercise patience in this race, despite it being the shortest race of the Michelin Endurance Cup calendar. At just 6 hours in length, it's going to require a flawless performance from the drivers, flawless performances from the crew, if they want to find themselves on the top step of that podium. Patience is really going to be the key here though, especially when it comes to navigating through traffic. And traffic there will be plenty of. Watkins Glen is the first race since Sebring that will feature all 5 of the classes in IMSA, and let's just hope that we don't pick up where the carnage left off in Sebring at the end of that race. Another thing to keep a close eye out on during this race, as well as the lead up to the race, is going to be the driver lineups for these cars. You see, the Pro-Am cars, they're going to carry 3 drivers. But it's once you get into the Pro class entries that you're going to see some teams carrying just a 2-driver lineup. Of course, with it being the shortest race of the Endurance Cup, it does allow teams to carry just the 2 drivers if they wish to do so. But it's going to be interesting to see how that strategy plays out for them. Maybe they can get a benefit not having to change drivers as often, and just getting the drivers that they do have more track time overall. Personally, the 6 hours of the Glen is one of, if not my favorite race on the calendar, and I'm super excited to be back at the track once again this year for this race. If you're going to be at the track as well and want to drop in and say hi, I am going to plan a small meetup. Make sure to keep an eye on the community tab of the YouTube channel, or you can actually hop into the Off in the S's Discord. The link to that will be in the show notes if you want to stay tuned in for some information on exactly when and where that little meetup is going to take place. In the meantime though, you can check out this video and get caught up to speed with everything that happened last round out at Laguna Seca. A huge thank you to all of the Patreon supporters. If you too want to support the show, you can head to patreon.com/offintheS's. Once again though, thanks for tuning in. I hope everyone has a great race weekend and doesn't go off in the S's.